Let's talk about Paris's relationships. And let's start with Jamie. Jamie's a Princeton student. He's supposed to be a year older than Paris. We meet Jamie at the beginning of season 3. He subtly asks Paris out on a date, and I really like the way that he does it.
And then tonight we should get together and celebrate over dinner.
What if we don't win?
Don't lose it on me now.
You're right.
Paris doesn't pick up on the fact that he asked her out, but I don't think that makes Jamie's invite any less cute or charming. Jamie then picks out a restaurant in the Zagat guide, and so it's quickly established that Jamie is a very nice, respectable guy. 6 episodes later, Jamie shows up at Chilton. Jamie explains that he never reached out to her because he wanted to focus on school, but he drove all the way to Chilton because he was so distracted by her. I can't blame Jamie for feeling the way that he does. I kind of understand his logic. What I found interesting is that Jamie returns in episode 7, the dance marathon episode. It is also the episode that Rory and Jess start dating, and it's the episode where Dave and Lane share their feelings for each other. All 3 relationships start in episode 7. Rory's is the first one to fall apart by the end of the season. Lane and Dave's relationship has no official ending, but the last we hear of him is season 4, episode 8. And Paris starts cheating on Jamie in season 4, episode 9. After Paris starts seeing Jamie, she becomes very distracted. Paris is late to science class. Paris also moves the Franklin meeting to the following week. I know many people have questioned the show's decision to make Rory valedictorian, but there is some evidence in the show that could explain why Paris wasn't always perfect in class. In episode 10, we see that Paris is distracted in class. She's not taking notes, she's doodling, and she doesn't even notice when the bell rings. We learn that Jamie bought Paris a train ticket to Philadelphia so that she can spend Christmas with him and his family. So Paris is already meeting the family, and they've only been dating for 3 episodes. Jamie told her he loved her, and he invited her for Easter break. Looking at the timeline, their relationship moved pretty quickly. They started seeing each other at the beginning of the school year, so September, and by Thanksgiving, Jamie already told her that he loves her. In episode 16, Paris says that she slept with Jamie. In season 3, we learn a bit about Paris's relationship with Jamie, but we don't actually see how they are when they're together. According to Paris, they're great together. She's clearly very enamored by him, and he loves her. Jamie's presence contributes to 2 different plot lines. It played a big part in the Francie conflict. The main reason that Paris was mad at Rory was because Rory told Francie about Jamie. Paris's relationship with Jamie also contributed to Paris's reconciliation with Rory. Early on in season 4, we find out that Paris is fighting with Jamie, but we don't know why. She says they're fighting because he's in love with the sound of his own voice. Their fight is very nondescript. The primary purpose of it was to show that Rory has a lot of distractions in her dorm. In episode 9, Paris starts seeing Asher Fleming. Then in episode 13, we find out that Paris is avoiding Jamie. Jamie comes up to visit Paris at Yale, and she doesn't want to see him. Jamie then talks to Rory, and we find out it's his birthday. When Rory tells Paris that what she's doing is wrong, Paris breaks up with Jamie in a horrible way.
We've got to end this now. There's just no reason to prolong it. Sorry you came all the way out here.
I think that Paris's breakup is terrible on several levels. First, she put Rory into the situation even though there was no reason to do that.
Well, Rory showed me the light. She made me see that there's just no point in going on.
Second, Paris gave Jamie no explanation for why she wants to break up. Third, she didn't even bother to do it face to face, even though he's literally in town. He's at Yale. But she did it over the phone. And fourth, it's his birthday. Either she knows it's his birthday and she doesn't care, or she doesn't know, which means she didn't bother to remember, even though they've been dating for over a year. I've noticed some similarities between Dean and Jamie, and I don't know if this was intended by the show, but both Jamie and Dean are depicted as the first love, and both are portrayed as the perfect first boyfriend. They both appear enamored very early on, and they express their feelings in a very obvious way. I know people have criticized Dean's initial interest in Rory because of how he watched Rory reading before he actually spoke to her. I think that Jamie's actions could also be interpreted in a creepy way. He drove 3 hours to a high school to talk to a girl that he went on a date with 3 months ago. He then holds her hand and refuses to let go of it. Then he takes her books. Looking at it through a different lens, Jamie could be seen as someone who's very intense and insistent. Both Dean and Jamie say, "I love you" after 3 months. And both Rory and Paris start to pull away because of a new man. Then we see that Dean and Jamie go out of their way to reach out to their girlfriends. In the nondescript fight between Jamie and Paris, it's Jamie who keeps calling Paris. He's the one who goes out of his way to see Paris. And something else that I found interesting is that the same language is used with respect to Dean and Jamie.
He's my first real boyfriend. Well, you got lucky with him.
You were really lucky with Dean. He was an exceptional first boyfriend.
Another element that's worth considering in the relationship between Paris and Jamie is the perspective. The entirety of Jamie's relationship with Paris is shown through Rory's eyes. We only know what Rory knows. Jamie is only in 3 episodes, and when he's on screen, Rory's on screen. When he's not on screen, we are watching Rory react to Paris's stories about him. We are not meant to know much about Jamie or Paris's relationship with him. We haven't followed Paris at all, so all of her storylines are in relation to Rory or the impact that her story has on Rory. In the breakup between Jamie and Paris, Rory is the focus. She's the one who's put into an uncomfortable position when she covers for Paris. She's the one to point out the problematic nature of Paris's actions. This is by no means a criticism of the show, because this show is not about Paris, it's about Rory. So the approach that the show takes makes a lot of sense. I just want to highlight this point to show that we get a very limited perspective on Paris's relationship with Jamie. What's happening here is that Rory is observing Paris display the same kind of behavior that Rory was displaying when she was saying Dean and going after Jess. Rory, of course, is lacking some self-awareness because she doesn't acknowledge the fact that she did the same thing. But Lorelai does point it out.
Honey, if she likes another guy, there's nothing you can do about it. Let us all remember Dean.
I'll come back to this. So what happened to poor Jamie? Don't worry, guys. I got you. I have a different story for Jamie. Jamie goes back to Princeton heartbroken. And remember Lindsay? So Lindsay had some surprises up her sleeve. Lindsay has always done well in school, which is part of the reason why Dean became so interested in her. Lindsay is also very book smart, and while her wish was to get married, she was encouraged by the school counselor to apply to colleges just in case. So she did, but she deferred her admission once she got engaged to Dean. After she split up with Dean, she took it as a sign that it was time to accept her admission to Princeton for the following year. At Princeton, she met Jamie, but because both of them have developed trust issues and baggage as a result of their breakups, they didn't want to date, but they became friends. Once Jamie graduated, he asked Lindsay out, and they've stayed together ever since. Asher Fleming. This might be the most uncomfortable relationship on the show, but we have to talk about it. So Paris starts seeing Asher Fleming in episode 9. Rory catches Paris making out with Asher after the Harvard-Yale game. So we're meant to assume that Paris interviewed Asher for the school paper and they got together pretty much right then and there. In the following episode, Rory catches Paris and Asher again, and Paris doesn't want to talk about the relationship, and Rory doesn't want to hear it. Rory does talk to Lorelai about it.
This is not the same as Dean. I did not cheat on Dean with an old guy.
I get why Rory doesn't see it as the same thing. Technically, it's not the same. Paris is sleeping with Asher, and as we learn later in the episode, they do couple things. Paris sees this relationship as becoming more serious. Rory, on the other hand, would pine for Jess. She would spend time with him, and she kissed him once while she was with Dean. All of this was wrong on Rory's part. But before Rory kissed Jess, there was at least plausible deniability of what Rory was doing. I'm not here to defend Rory's actions. She's still in the wrong for what she did, but Paris really took it to the next level. So I do feel that what Paris did and what Rory did is not exactly the same thing, although I do see similarities. And I wish that when Rory spoke to Paris, she would have brought up her own personal experience and talked about how wrong it was and how guilty she feels for what she has done. I feel like it's kind of a missed opportunity for the show. Clearly, the show was aware of the fact that there's a parallel because Lorelai brought it up. I think that would have been a really good chance for Lorelai and Rory to talk about how the situation is different, how it's similar, and the problematic nature of what Paris is doing and what Rory did. Lorelai and Rory never really talked about it. So I guess what was the point of bringing this in if we're not going to address it? But there's a much bigger elephant in the room that we have to address, and that's the predatory nature of the relationship. As I've mentioned previously, I don't know how I feel about Rory being tolerant of the relationship. I think that as Paris's peer, Rory is in a weird spot when it comes to telling Paris what to do. She might not understand the problem herself, but Lorelai is in a different position. She's an adult. Now, she's not in any way connected to the school, and it's not her job to look after Paris, but I think it's easier to question Lorelai's reaction than Rory's reaction. However, I can't judge Lorelai's actions here because I see this as a limitation of the show. Lorelai didn't talk about the problem because the show didn't want to talk about the problem. The issues with Paris's relationship are never fully discussed. The show presents the main issue as Asher's age, and the show treats the relationship as a joke for the audience. The show didn't create this storyline to talk about the power imbalances in relationships. It was done for comedy. Lorelai's and Rory's reactions and characters were therefore limited in scope. Also, the early 2000s and 2010s was a period of time when shows would create these types of relationships, but never really address the issue. If the show was created in the modern day, here's how I would want it to play out. Lorelai would mention the relationship to Richard as Richard is Asher's friend. Richard, I think, would be the type of man who would initially close his eyes on this type of relationship and not believe Lorelai. So this would create family tension as per usual. Richard would then confirm this information with Rory, and after Lorelai would point out the fact that Paris is Rory's age and ask Richard how he would feel if it was Rory, Richard would become incited and give an earful to Asher and call Yale. This would tie Paris's story arc into the Gilmore Girls' main plot. It would no longer be a side plot line, but a valuable story exploring the relationship between Lorelai, Richard, and Rory. This plot line would also create tension between Rory and Paris. Paris would flip out at Rory for revealing the information, and Rory would try to defend herself, arguing that she was just trying to look out for Paris. But alas, I'm not a writer, I wasn't in the writer's room, so let's get back to the show. Paris leaves in the middle of a Yale Daily News meeting and Rory covers for her, saying that she left because her aunt is sick. By the end of episode 10, Paris wants to talk to Rory about Asher, but Rory doesn't want to hear it. Then, as we know, Rory brings everything out in the open because Jamie visited. Paris defends her actions by saying,
I know I've mishandled the Jamie situation. He just can't take a hint.
At the end, however, Rory says that she just wants Paris to be happy. And Paris really does seem to be happy in her relationship with Asher. She's always eager to talk about him. She wants him around all the time. When they're on spring break, Paris keeps waiting for a call from Asher, and she later says that she wishes that Asher invited her to Denver with him. We then find out from Doyle that Asher dates a freshman girl every year. We also see that Rory feels uncomfortable being in Asher's class. Rory gets a very good grade. She questions it. She questions Asher on it, and I think it's perfectly justified. We also see that Paris uses Rory to visit Asher in class. Then Asher ends up in the hospital. Paris panics. She's very worried for him in the hospital, and this is the first time that Paris realizes how old Asher is. She starts to doubt whether or not she should even go to London with Asher. Then we get a scene which I think is very questionable.
So I was thinking of going alone. Oh, I'd like you to go, but I don't want you to be bored.
So technically, Asher is giving Paris an out. He's saying, you don't have to come with me. But when Paris asks what he wants, he says that he wants her around. There's just something about that scene that feels so wrong because we know as the audience that Paris was about to tell Asher that she didn't want to go. The fact that Asher made the suggestion and then told her how much he likes her and how much he wants her around made Paris change her mind. Asher's offer doesn't feel altruistic to me. It feels manipulative. In season 5, Asher dies, and while the show focuses on Paris' sadness, his death is dealt in a comedic way. Paris says that because he died while she was in love with him, she might always love him. The show never addresses this in the future. The whole thing seems to be erased. Her relationship with Asher is only brought up briefly when Paris starts dating again. I also want to talk about perspective. Much like with Jamie, Paris' relationship with Asher is mostly about Rory's reaction to the relationship. It's not about Paris. The focus is Rory and how the relationship is a nuisance to her. When Paris and Asher are together, we are seeing them through Rory's eyes. We watch Rory's discomfort when Paris talks about Asher. Rory is the one who has to cover for Paris when she leaves the newspaper meeting. Rory is the one who covers for Paris when Jamie comes to visit. Paris wakes up Rory in the middle of the night to talk about Asher. Rory is also Paris's beard when Paris comes to Rory's class when she waits for Asher. The focus is also on Rory when Rory worries about her good grade because Asher is the one who gave her the good grade. So basically, the story is not about Paris dealing with this relationship or the repercussions on her life so much as it is about how Rory copes with this relationship. To this point, we have barely gotten any scenes with Paris and her relationship that's not tied to Rory. The closest is the conversation with Asher and Paris in the hospital episode, but Rory's there in the scene prior and then Paris comes out to talk to Rory. I know I'm belaboring this point, but that's because it informs how the show approached Paris's relationship and how the show approached Paris as a character. Paris has not existed without Rory or Lorelai. The first scene that we get with Paris that doesn't have Rory or Lorelai is the scene with Asher. We had a similar situation with Lane. Lane's relationship with Henry was mostly shown from Rory's perspective, but we do get one scene with Lane and Henry without Rory. After Henry, however, the show actually follows Lane. Lane gets a lot of scenes with Dave and a lot of scenes with Zach, and it's not tied to Rory whatsoever. So in conclusion, the show didn't want us to think about this relationship in the context of what it means for Paris and her future. This relationship was created for two purposes. One, for comedy, and two, to create another challenge for Rory while she's at Yale. Doyle McMaster. Before I talk about Doyle, I have to share my biases. By the time that I saw the 4th season of Gilmore Girls, I had seen Buffy the Vampire Slayer many, many times. To me, Danny Strong will always be Jonathan, and I love Jonathan, even though Jonathan is problematic.
I snuck in yesterday and peed in the pool.
So when I saw Doyle, my initial reaction was, Jonathan. So with that said, let's talk about Doyle. We're introduced to Doyle in season 4 as the editor-in-chief of the Yale Daily News. He's a very tough editor, but he comes off as fair, generally. He is hard on Rory, and he is hard on Glenn, but he's also sympathetic. When Rory says that Paris left because her aunt is sick, he believes Rory and he's very understanding. When Trix dies and Rory is using the Yale Daily News resources, Doyle is at first very hard on Rory, but when he finds out it's because Trix died, he's very sympathetic. Doyle also gives Rory a lot of criticisms. He thinks her review pieces are boring because she's not sharing her opinion. He also praises Paris for all the complaints that the newspaper has been getting. This is cute, and I think it sets up the relationship for the future, but it also doesn't feel realistic. If this was TMZ, I would get it, but I don't think receiving complaints for a college newspaper is something that an editor-in-chief would praise. What I like about Doyle's management style is that he runs a tight ship, but he also doesn't micromanage. He lets his staff make decisions and make mistakes. When they fail, he wants them to keep trying. He tells Rory to go with her gut, even though he doesn't believe her article ideas are good. I personally like this type of leadership, where you are guided but allowed to make your own decisions and learn from your mistakes. I found that Paris and Doyle are somewhat similar in how they approach their roles as editor-in-chief. Both are unscrupulous in their edits and are very tough. Both also pick on people and complain that people are not working hard enough. However, Doyle ultimately treats people with more respect and allows his staff to make decisions. We also see that Doyle sucks up to Logan because of Mitchum Huntsberger. Although we don't see Paris sucking up to Logan, we have seen this type of behavior from her in the past.
And I spent all of last year sucking up to Francine Jarvis.
So what I mean to say is that while Paris and Doyle have different personalities, they do have some similarities between them. About halfway through season 5, Terrence, Paris's life coach, encourages Paris to start dating again. Paris takes his advice and decides to put herself out there.
It's 11 o'clock at night. Who are you hoping to hook up with now, Spike and Drusilla?
Paris and Doyle run into each other at a speed dating event and they hit it off right away. The speed dating event is the first time on the show that we're actually following Paris's story. We get to see how Paris and Doyle connect with each other. It's very clear at the speed dating event that they enjoy talking about the same thing. They skip going out to dinner and cut to sleeping together because they both knew it was headed that way. Paris then wants to have a conversation with Doyle to establish what their relationship is, which is great, but she involves Terrence and wants Doyle to talk about it with Terrence while he's on speakerphone, which is not great. Although we as the audience get to follow Paris in her relationship with Doyle still serves as a parallel to Rory's relationship. In episode 13, Rory starts seeing Logan casually. By episode 14, both girls are talking about how they are tethered to their phone because they are waiting for their guy to call, and both of them ask for relationship advice. This continues on into the next episode when Paris uses the word lover to refer to Doyle, and Doyle says that it hasn't been established yet. The parallels with Rory and Paris continue in episode 18, where both girls go to Stars Hollow and get drunk with Lane. I think that their storylines work really well here. First, the similar relationship problems allow Rory and Paris to bond with each other on another level. Second, it allows all three girls to find common ground. This is one of the few times that we don't see Paris competing with other women. Third, these storylines are exploring a common relationship problem that women experience in their 20s. In episode 19, both Rory and Paris enter committed relationships. Rory talks to Logan, and Logan decides that he wants to be exclusive. After hearing about Rory's development, Paris is inspired and tells Doyle that they need to have a conversation. We learn by the end of the episode that Doyle wants to be with Paris. We also find out the reason why Doyle was so resistant to a relationship.
She broke his heart, slept with his best friend, and took the dog. He swore off women completely until he met me.
I like the fact that the show decided to add this narrative and actually explain why Doyle has so much baggage and why he was afraid of dating Paris. By episode 20, Paris is very happy. She's singing and she's acting like she's in love. At the beginning of season 6, we learn that Paris has met a lot of Doyle's family and she will be meeting more of his family. She's also moving in with him. They both go to Rory's 21st birthday party, and they do that annoyingly cute couple thing where they tell the same story multiple times, finishing each other's sentences.
Last year, I was sleeping with the editor.
And this year I am.
I think they're so adorable in that scene together. When they're living together, they're also on the same page about being overly safe in their neighborhood. They both practice Krav Maga and attack each other. He is a bit weird, just like Paris, and he's willing to do wacky things with Paris. I personally can't picture Jamie or Asher doing Krav Maga with Paris in the same way. Then we have the Paris as a tyrant plotline when she takes over as editor. Doyle is conspicuously absent during this time. This, I think, was done so that Rory's story arc progresses. Doyle couldn't step in because the show wanted Rory to be the one to save the newspaper. Rory was the one who was supposed to be elected editor-in-chief. Doyle does appear after the fallout. Paris takes a very long time to recover after being ousted as editor. Rory wants Paris to return to her old self, so Rory asks Doyle if maybe she should turn Paris's article into a series for the newspaper. And I absolutely love how Doyle handles the situation.
Would you do that for any other staffer who was treating you the way she is?
I like how unbiased he is in his approach. That is the right thing to do. He acknowledges the fact that he wants Paris to get back to normal more than anybody, but he says that she has to do it on her own. She shouldn't be coddled, and I think Doyle is absolutely right. It wouldn't be fair to the rest of the newspaper staff. Paris finds out and she breaks up with Doyle and kicks him out of her apartment. Whether or not that was the main reason Paris broke up with him is unclear. Doyle said that they were already fighting at that point. Also, Paris has also been in a very unstable mood since she was fired from her position, so her decision is coming from the fact that she has been miserable the whole time and not sleeping and just crafting the whole night. Rory breaks up with Logan at the same time that Paris breaks up with Doyle. Doyle and Rory run into each other at a bar and they get drunk. Then Doyle kisses Rory's neck, which I think is just, it's terrible. Like, I guess you guys could tell that I really like Doyle, but I can also acknowledge the times where I'm like, no, Doyle, bad Doyle. I don't think that what he did was okay, but his immediate reaction to what he did makes me inclined to forgive him. Doyle shows immediate remorse. He shocked himself that he did that. We understand that he's in a very emotional state, and he's also very drunk, and he's very sorry for what happened. Doyle then comes to Paris's apartment at the same time that Logan shows up at their apartment. Doyle says he doesn't want to break up. Doyle and Paris get back together that night, as do Rory and Logan. Then Doyle and Paris look after Logan after his injury, and we again see how well those two work as a couple. They're on the same page and following Rory's instructions. They're both really into the Penguin movie, and they both can't bear to look at a dead penguin. From the beginning, Paris's relationship with Doyle is different from all of her previous relationships. Finally, Paris gets her own storyline without Rory. We actually see her interactions. We know a lot more about Doyle than the other romantic interests. Even though Paris's relationship with Doyle gets to blossom on its own, in seasons 5 and 6, I believe this storyline was designed as a parallel to Rory's romantic storyline. Both girls get into a complicated relationship around the same time. They both enter committed relationships at the same time. They both have breakups at the same time, and they get back together with their partners at the same time. In season 7, Paris and Doyle have a seemingly stable relationship. We don't hear much about their relationship as Doyle is mostly absent. We do see them dancing at the 2002 party and practicing beforehand, and I love it so much. Those two are so good together. So once again, we see that they can be very silly and playful with each other. Doyle is also there to support Paris when she's opening up her admission letters to grad schools. He and Rory both cheer Paris on when she gets in, and they both try to calm Paris down when she starts to get anxious. Paris then breaks up with Doyle again and kicks him out of the apartment. The way that the scene plays out, it's suggested that Paris doesn't even tell Doyle why she's breaking up with him. We, however, quickly find out why she's doing it. Paris doesn't want to factor Doyle into her decision-making process. Despite this, Paris is very sad about her breakup and she misses Doyle. Similar to their last breakup, Doyle shows up at the apartment and says that he doesn't want to break up. He says that he will follow Paris wherever she wants to go. At the end, Doyle and and Paris plan on going on a backpacking trip, which includes India. They seem to be very much in love. When she's acting neurotic, he responds in a very sweet and supportive way. I think that Doyle was very good for Paris, at least for a period of time. There are a lot of scenes which demonstrate why this relationship works. They're both intelligent. They enjoy the same topics. Doyle admires how cutthroat and tough Paris is, and I think that's because he has that in him as well. He wants to support her unconditionally in anything that she decides to do. They're both wacky in a similar way with the yoga and the Krav Maga and the dancing. Paris does things to push Doyle away. She kicks him out twice, and both times, her reasons don't seem to be well thought out. So because of that, I could see how their relationship didn't work out in the end.